After almost 20 years together, he suddenly said, "Our marriage isn't working," and just like that, he asked for a divorce. I signed the papers in silence. A few months later, as he celebrated his engagement to his assistant at the same beachfront resort where we'd once spent our summers, I showed up without warning. "Quite the occasion," I said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a copy of his mother's will. Turns out there was a clause he must have forgotten about: divorce me, and he forfeits everything. His fiancée's scream was something else, pure gold. "This isn't working." These words blew up almost 2 decades of marriage. He dropped the words on a Monday evening, right in the middle of dinner at Esther's, our regular place. Daniel wouldn't even look at me when he said it. He just kept his eyes glued to his wine glass, watching the condensation trickle down like it was more interesting than the woman who'd stood by him for half her life. But I'm jumping ahead. The real story started about 2 weeks earlier, in a cold, impersonal exam room with white clean walls and those cheesy motivational posters about bravery that suddenly felt like a joke. "Mrs. Davis, we found a malignant tumor." Dr. Reed spoke gently, her tone calm but firm. She looked at me with these kind, clear eyes behind no-nonsense glasses. "The good news is, we caught it early," she continued. "With surgery and radiation, your chances are strong." I remember nodding, asking the right questions, scheduling appointments, going through the motions like I was on autopilot. The diagnosis didn't feel real. I was 45, and just saying the word cancer out loud felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. The timing couldn't have been worse. Daniel had just been made senior partner at his firm, more pressure and responsibility. I'd spent months managing charity events, dinner parties, keeping up appearances. It was all part of the package that helped boost his image. And now this, a disease that didn't fit into our picture-perfect lives. On the way home, I practiced how I'd break the news to him, calm, logical, the way he liked problems handled. But when I got back, the house was empty. My phone buzzed, "Working late. Don't wait up." Again. I laid a hand over my chest, where the tumor quietly lurked, and wondered when exactly my husband had started to check out. That night, I sat by myself in the kitchen, fingers tracing the patterns on the marble countertop we'd picked out together. When did this house stop feeling like a home? When did I stop being his beloved woman and turn into just another well-placed accessory in his life? Looking back, the signs had been there for months. Suddenly, he cared a lot more about how he looked, designer suits, a gym membership he actually used. Our conversations had gotten shorter. His tone, sharper. During the rare times we had dinner together, he was more interested in checking his phone than talking to me. He even flinched when I reached for his hand. But I kept ignoring it, too busy holding everything together. "Helen, did you reschedule the dinner with the Hendersons?" he asked one morning, eyes glued to his phone as we shared our brief 5 minutes over coffee. "I thought we could talk about something important first," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can it wait? I've got court in an hour. The Jason's case is a mess." I swallowed both my frustration and my cold coffee. "Sure. It can wait." Days stretched into weeks. He kept getting home later, with excuses that barely held together. I went to my first oncology appointment alone, telling myself I was being strong, not abandoned. I started noticing the cracks. Our photos showed us smiling, but none of them looked happy. We'd been sleeping in separate rooms for months, his late hours and my early mornings, just a polite cover. Then came the credit card bills. Charges from jewelry stores I'd never heard of. Dinner spots that weren't meant for business meetings. Late-night phone calls he took in the garage, voice hushed. That day, he said, "I think we should do something special this weekend. There's something important we need to talk about." His tone was neutral, like he was reading from a script. Although for a second, hope sparked. Maybe we could fix this. I spent hours getting ready, picked a dress, dabbed on makeup to cover the fatigue. I even called my sister and finally told her what was going on. "He's finally noticed," I told her. "This might be our chance." A wake-up call. She paused. Have you thought that maybe it's not about that? I brushed off her worry. 19 years had to mean something. Esther's was quiet that night. The dim lighting made the place feel intimate, like old times. Daniel looked anxious, fidgeting, checking his watch. Something in my gut tightened. He'd picked a public spot for a reason. This isn't working anymore, Helen, he said, cutting me off just as I was about to tell him about the cancer. His words fell between us like shattered glass. All this years? I asked softly. We're just not the same people anymore. The rest of his little speech sounded like something he practiced in a mirror. It's best we end things cleanly. Is there someone else? The words were out before I even knew I was thinking them. He hesitated. That pause said more than anything he could have come up with. Alyssa, he muttered. My assistant Alyssa. Like it was some minor accident. And here I was, still carrying the weight of a diagnosis I hadn't had the chance to share, while he was busy falling for a girl young enough to call me ma'am. And she was the picture of health maybe. I'm filing for divorce, he added, sliding a business card across the table like it was just another business deal. My attorney will contact you. I've already signed a lease on a new place. That's all? I asked, surprised at how calm I sounded. He didn't expect me to stay composed. Yeah, he said, cautious. I think that's everything. Without another word, I folded my napkin, left my untouched dinner on the table, and walked out. I was heartbroken, sure, but I wasn't going to fall apart in front of him. The cancer could wait. First, I had to survive the fallout. A few days after that dinner, a thick manila envelope landed in my mailbox. I opened it. Almost 20 years of marriage, reduced to itemized lists and clean splits. The house? Sell it. Split the money. Retirement savings? Divided evenly. Every gift? Labeled, priced, and assigned. All it needed was my signature, and that would be the end of it. I knew I should have gotten legal advice, maybe pushed back. Later that night, I called my sister Nina. She was livid. Helen, don't make it easy on him. Take him to the cleaners. I need to take care of my health first, I told her. I didn't bring up the cancer. I hadn't even told Daniel. The truth was, I couldn't afford the energy it would take to fight. But deep down, I wasn't giving up. I was choosing my moment. I signed the divorce papers the next morning. I included a short note declining mediation, then sent the whole thing back. After that, I made calls. The first was to my doctor to schedule surgery. The second was to Norma Davis, Daniel's mom. Norma had always shown up for me. He was the one who stepped in when my own father had nothing to give. After Mom died in college, it was Norma who helped me figure out how to keep going. Even after Daniel and I started drifting apart, my connection with Norma stayed strong. I figured I'd be hearing from you, he said when he picked up. His voice was slower now, but still sharp. Did he give you a reason? I asked, settling into the porch swing. Some nonsense about growing apart, he said with a sigh. For a minute, neither of us said anything. The silence was oddly comforting. I'd like to stay in touch, maybe meet for lunch, I said. If that's all right. Helen, nothing would make me happier. We met that week. He looked tired. At one point, he set down his knife and said, Daniel takes after his father in the worst ways. I always hoped your kindness would balance him out. But I think I let too much slide. I did too, I said, quietly. Then Norma leaned in a bit and placed her hand over mine. There's something you need to know, he said. She told me that after her husband passed, she'd rewritten the will. Daniel was his only child, he stood to inherit everything, the company, the lake house, a large sum of money. But I added a condition, Norma said. A safeguard, you could call it. She went on to explain that if Daniel ever divorced me, without proof I'd cheated, he'd lose it all. The inheritance was tied to our marriage. Daniel couldn't walk away clean unless I gave him a reason. Why would you do that? I asked, stunned. Because I saw how he treated you, even back then, Norma said. I've watched too many men throw their wives aside like worn-out shoes. I didn't want to let that happen to you. I sat there, trying to wrap my head around it. Does Daniel even know? He never read the damn thing, Norma said with a dry smile. That changed everything. On the walk home, I felt something close to power inside. Maybe Daniel believed he'd wiped the slate clean. But he had no idea what he'd just given up. Over the next few weeks, I began to stitch myself back together. I had the surgery, he never even knew. I reconnected with people I hadn't spoken to in years. Hired a financial planner. Started treatment with Nina beside me at every appointment. And then came the gut punch. I was scrolling one night when I saw the Instagram post. Alyssa had tagged him at Maple and Thyme, that swanky spot that's practically built for proposals. There it was, front and center, her hand, nails flawless, wearing a diamond. Comments poured in. A few came from people who'd once sat at our dinner table. They'd gotten engaged only weeks after our divorce was final. That night, I sat in bed and scrolled through her public posts, slowly piecing together a story he thought he'd buried. There were photos from work events, the two of them always a little too close. Company dinners with no sign of his partners. Vacations masked as conferences. Just as I was about to close the app, one final photo stopped me. It was Norma's cabin, nestled quietly in the hills of Napa Valley. I knew every inch of that house like the back of my hand. It had once been our sanctuary, the place Daniel had proposed to me all those years ago. But this photo wasn't just a snapshot. The caption said it all, planning our perfect engagement party. My stomach dropped. He was planning to celebrate his new life with her in the same space that had once marked the beginning of ours. What Daniel didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask, was that the cottage had been protected. Norma's will made sure of it. That property was off limits to Daniel if he ever left me without cause. He thought he had it all figured out. But Norma had seen this coming long before I had. And now, without even trying, I held the one thing that could unravel Daniel's perfect ending. 2 weeks. That's how long I had until their party at Lakeview. Not much time, but enough. One afternoon, Nina made a comment that stuck. She reminded me that I'd lived nearly 25 years as Helen Hayes before ever becoming Helen Davis. I had lost so much of myself during my marriage, I'd forgotten who I used to be. The next morning, I marched into the courthouse and filed the paperwork to take back my original name. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman with a smirk that said she'd seen it all, gave me a knowing look as she stamped the forms. And just like that, something inside me clicked. Helen Hayes wasn't gone, she'd just been quiet for a while. I started reclaiming other parts of my life too. I reconnected with Veronica Lynn, my old mentor from the law firm I gave up when Daniel's career took precedence. She was as sharp as ever and wasted no time once I explained the situation. Her advice was simple: get the will legally reinforced. Have everything documented. Norma's clause meant nothing if we couldn't prove its legitimacy. With Veronica's help, I got it done, court-certified, notarized, ready to be presented when the moment was right. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. My oncologist gave me a promising prognosis after the final radiation round. My financial advisor helped me create a solid plan for the future, and I signed a lease on a small but beautiful apartment of my own. Then came an unexpected knock at my door. Tomas, my neighbor, the quiet type, a widower who had always leaned more toward Daniel than me, showed up with a container of homemade soup and a heavy expression. He told me he'd overheard Daniel at the club, spinning a story about how I'd been unstable for years. That he had no choice but to leave. I'd expected him to rewrite the past. But hearing how casually he tore me down to justify himself still hurt more than I cared to admit. Tomas looked uncomfortable but sincere. I just wanted you to know, it's not the story everyone's buying. And if you ever need someone to speak up for you, I will. I thanked him. With 10 days to go, I focused on preparation. Veronica made sure we had everything in legal order. Nina helped me find something to wear, nothing flashy, but something that reminded me I was still strong, still worth seeing. A week before the trip, Norma called. Daniel had invited her to the party. Norma told him he wasn't feeling up to traveling, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. She planned to arrive the day after. Just in time for the fallout. And she'd made arrangements for his lawyer to send the formal inheritance letter, confirming exactly what Daniel had lost. It would hit his inbox the morning after the party. Timing, Norma said, is everything. As I folded clothes into my overnight bag and tucked the notarized copy of Norma's will into my purse, I felt something settle within me, not anger. Purpose. I checked the flight confirmation, closed my laptop, and stared at the stillness around me. The reckoning was set to begin. The next afternoon, the familiar roads wound ahead of me like a film reel. Every turn brought a memory, our first anniversary getaway, Norma patiently teaching us the names of wildflowers, the fall we spent repainting the shutters together, sapphire blue color. Now those shutters were stark white, like the place had been bleached of memory. As I neared the last turn, a wave of nerves passed through me. I pulled off to the side of the road for a moment, hands steadying on the wheel, and took a breath. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of the sloped roof and could hear laughter floating from the lake. The party had begun. Looking into the rearview mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Months ago, I'd signed divorce papers in quiet despair. Now, that same woman stood taller. My silver hair, once hidden with dye, framed a confident, cropped bob. The tiredness in my eyes had lifted, replaced by something clearer. Now is just the right time to arrive after everyone had settled in, but before the drinks dulled their attention. The gravel drive had been groomed to perfection. Sleek cars lined both sides, mostly from Daniel's law firm, no doubt. I parked quietly, blending into the row of luxury vehicles, and took a moment with my hand resting over the envelope. I stepped out of the car, adjusted the dress and followed the sound of string music down toward the lake. The back lawn had been transformed into an upscale event space, white tables draped in linen, calla lilies arranged with careful symmetry, servers in crisp uniforms passing around canapes and cocktails. Familiar faces began to register. Colleagues of Daniel's. Old neighbors. Club acquaintances. A few recognized me, their expressions shifting uncomfortably as I approached. Daniel stood near the bar, one arm looped casually around Alyssa's waist, surrounded by his firm's top brass. I didn't need to see his face to know him. The way he tilted his head when he wanted to impress someone, the lean into his hip, his old posture, unchanged. Alyssa noticed me first. Her expression froze mid-laugh, recognition dawning, and her hand tightened on Daniel's sleeve. She whispered something. Daniel turned. First came irritation, then confusion, and finally a performance of calm. He greeted me with forced civility, clearly hoping to whisk me away before anyone noticed. I didn't give him the chance. I simply told him I had something to deliver, and that I wouldn't stay long. I took the envelope from my purse and held it out. He didn't take it. Instead, he scanned the guests nervously, gauging how visible this all was. Alyssa, now fully alert, stepped in, demanding to know what was going on. Her voice had that sharp edge of someone who already suspected the worst. I explained simply, it was a copy of a clause in Norma's will, something Daniel had evidently never bothered to read. Her reaction was instant. She grabbed the document, scanning the lines like she could erase them with her eyes. The legal seal shimmered under the sunlight. She looked up, accusing. This can't be real. But Daniel didn't argue. He was pale now, and silent. I kept my voice steady. The clause was clear. If he initiated divorce without evidence of my infidelity, he forfeited his inheritance. The company shares, the investments and the cottage. And Norma had left nothing to chance. Alyssa turned to him in disbelief, waiting for him to refute it, but he stayed quiet, caught in the realization of what he'd thrown away. My mother would never do this, the certainty in his voice had vanished. She did, I said. Because she saw something in you I was too blind to admit for years. Around us, conversations had gone quiet. People were listening now. One of Daniel's partners stood a few feet away, brow furrowed, doing his own mental calculations. I finished the thought aloud, so no one could miss it. The inheritance. This property. It all reverts to Norma's chosen charity. I let the silence stretch after delivering the final blow, just long enough for the words to land with full weight. Unless, I added simply, you can prove I was unfaithful. Alyssa's face contorted. Anger overtook her as she hissed something about manipulation and betrayal. In her mind, I had somehow engineered all of this, tricked a dying woman into destroying their perfect future. But Norma had put that clause in place years ago. Long before she showed up. The moment was unraveling fast. One of Daniel's senior partners stepped forward, face grave, asking if the claim was true. The firm's shares weren't as secure as they'd thought. Daniel tried to regain control, calling it a misunderstanding. He reached for the document, scrambling for a loophole, some exception that would undo the damage. I calmly took the paper from Alyssa's shaking hands. You'll receive the official letter from Norma's lawyer tomorrow, I said, loud enough for those around us to hear. I just thought it was fair to give you a bit of a heads up. Congratulations again, of course. Alyssa's eyes bounced between the two of us, beginning to register what this meant. The lifestyle, the house, the security. Gone. Her scream cracked through the air. You said it was all handled, she yelled at Daniel. I turned then. My part in this was done. As I walked back toward the car, the noise behind me swelled, Alyssa's furious voice, confused whispers from guests, the low murmur of disbelief. Daniel tried to hush the chaos, but the tone of his voice had shifted. He sounded small and uncertain. For the first time in a long while I felt light. The burden I'd been carrying, grief, betrayal, shame, was gone. What Daniel was about to lose wasn't just money or a home, it was his image, his legacy. The cost of his decisions had finally come due. I started the car and glanced once at the cottage in the mirror. The music had stopped. The white paper lanterns fluttered in the breeze, aimless. The picture-perfect celebration had dissolved into something far more real. That evening, back at the inn across the lake, I sat by the window with a tray of room service and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. Over breakfast in the sunlit solarium, I finally checked my messages. I've got Norma's voicemail. She'd arrived at the cottage early that morning. Said Daniel looked devastated. The lawyer had delivered the official documents. Timing, just as planned. I drove home slowly, stopping at overlooks along the way, letting the mountain air clear my mind. I was just reaching the city's outskirts when my phone rang again. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated, but I picked up. We need to talk, he said. I'm listening. Not like this. Please. In person. I agreed, and we met the following night, neutral ground, a small cafe halfway between our old house and his new apartment. He was already there when I arrived, tucked into a corner table. His clothes were wrinkled. His face unshaven. He stood awkwardly, unsure of how to greet me. I sat down. What did you want to say? Alyssa's gone. The firm put me on leave. Mom won't return my calls. Then he looked me in the eyes. You've destroyed everything. No, Daniel. You did that. A waitress approached, sensed the tension, and left without taking an order. He leaned forward, voice low but urgent. You knew about the clause during the divorce. You could have told me. I met his stare. Would it have changed anything? I didn't do any of this to hurt you, I said calmly, I just stopped shielding you from the consequences of your choices. So now you get the satisfaction of watching me lose everything? I shook my head. The inheritance isn't mine. It's going to charity. But I did gain the strength to stop being invisible. And then, I told him what I had never gotten the chance to before. I have cancer. He froze, stunned into silence. Stage 2 breast cancer. I was diagnosed about a month before you asked for the divorce. I tried to tell you at Esther's. But you were already halfway out the door. His face crumbled. I didn't know. Helen. I had no idea. I know, I said. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I'm done carrying things alone. I'm in remission now. My prognosis is good. He looked away. I watched him, this man I'd once built a life around, and saw someone hollowed out by the fallout of his own choices. 1 week later, Daniel's firm released a brief statement to the local business press. He'd resigned to pursue other opportunities. His managing partner, once a regular at our dinner table, wasted no time distancing himself. Friends who'd rallied around Daniel during the divorce suddenly recalled old connections with me. The fallout was quiet but unmistakable. I observed it all without emotion. My focus had turned inward. Rebuilding mattered more than reacting. Spring arrived with hopeful news from my doctor. I was healing, slowly, steadily, and beginning to feel like myself again. There was no space left for bitterness toward Daniel, no grief weighing me down. What filled me instead was strength, and a renewed hunger to truly live.